Good afternoon. I'm here today to talk about the Scottish Spatial Data Infrastructure. And we define spatial data infrastructure being the exchange of data over the web, the World Wide Web explicitly. I'm speaking for two other colleagues working within the Scottish Government for this Scottish Government initiative, and one of the colleagues, Alex Ramage, there is sitting here with us today if you want to ask more questions. Interestingly, he is from the organisation Transport Scotland, so I will ask a question later on that relates to Anna's talk. There we go. The Scottish Spatial Data Infrastructure environment consists of a single portal using GeoNetwork open source, and most of the elements in this SSDI are from open source, but some of them are not. That has four elements: a metadata catalogue, a metadata editor, a view service client viewer, and harvestable information to the member state level, remembering that Scotland is a devolved administration within the United Kingdom member state of the EU currently. The view services exist in a federated scenario, therefore. Each data provider within Scotland provides their own view services and metadata. We have released this infrastructure to the providers of the data providers to a small number of organisations at this time, mainly to Annex 1 organisations in the Scottish Government family, to ensure that the Scottish Government fulfils its requirements within the EU legislation, as enacted in the UK, but also as enacted in Scotland. A couple of weeks ago, there were 173 metadata or service metadata records, dataset or service metadata records, some INSPIRE and some not INSPIRE. The Scottish Spatial Data Infrastructure is as much about data that will fundamentally be part of defined INSPIRE themes as it is about other data that other Scottish Government initiatives wish organisations to exchange more openly over the web with higher interoperability. The experience from last year, well, first of all, the metadata, many speakers last year talked a lot about metadata. The metadata complies with a UK standard called GEMINI 2.1, which has been, the .1, has been expanded to being conformant with INSPIRE. And in fact, recently, it's been re-refined, so we should refer to it as a UK GEMINI 2.1 as amended, because some metadata rules we discovered over time, and this is what experience is all about, needed to be relaxed. Now, any of you in the audience who are experienced with metadata will know that restricting what you put in metadata is sometimes helpful to the person who has to fulfill that data. You get more meaningful things if it is clearer and more closely defined what you put in there. But nonetheless, we found that the INSPIRE rules, to fit the INSPIRE rules, it needed to be relaxed a bit. INSPIRE metadata rules from the IR are in that sense slightly more relaxed and wide and more encompassing. We provide a tool to do this metadata provision and checking, but not all metadata is created using this tool, which is called the UK Metadata Editor. We'll see that in a moment. Some people use Esri software for producing metadata, and several organisations, because they need to create metadata for a variety of needs, and INSPIRE metadata, in the UK known as GEMINI 2.1 as amended, is after all discovery metadata, and there are other types of metadata out there. So some people have actually coded creating this metadata, but it's all checked as it is loaded into the central portal. This involves significant guidance, and we're going through various iterations of improving that guidance, really from the experience that we've learnt along the way from last year. Scottish-specific guidance, that is to say, talking about code lists that are only used in Scotland for administrative boundaries and that sort of thing, and making things clearer generally, is currently in production. Once that guidance is out, the users and the contributors to the system will be broadened, and we actually, believe it or not, have people beating on our door to broaden it to them, which is always a surprise, but pleasurable surprise. So we will expand it to further Annex 1 data, Annex 2 and 3 data, and more organisations who want to provide their data that the Scottish Government wishes to see available. including non-environmental data of interest to the wider community in Scotland and elsewhere. All of this stems from a Scottish Government policy, One Scotland, One Geography, the Geographic Information Strategy, which you will note has just run out. Wrong button. Has just run out. So we're writing a new one on that, based on our experiences up to these years. But basically the Scottish SDI infrastructure, and just as a slight aside, I did mention that actually within this particular devolved administration there is its own statutory instrument. In other words, the EU legislation was put into Scottish law. Fundamentally what that means for me and my Scottish Government colleagues is that we have to report to ministers, and ministers be done on X, and also the data providers have to be aware that what they're doing is being monitored by ministers. Now this wiring diagram you won't be able to read, but it does actually describe in fairly simple terms what we're talking about. This was created by our previous colleague, the one who always goes around this conference wearing his kilt. You know the one I mean. We do have kilts, we just don't wear them in these conferences. But fundamentally all that wiring diagram or scroll is about, we are talking about a truly distributed SOI. Data providers are responsible for providing the services, they're responsible for providing the metadata, and we provide one portal in which that data and those services can be discovered. But of course, we're talking about a distributed service-oriented architecture, which is what INSPIRE is. Such metadata can be discovered in lots of different places. That's part of the infrastructure, if you like. And the services are always available from source, from the data provider, or the service provider if they have asked somebody to provide services for them. So here we have the Scottish SDI Discovery Metadata Catalogue, basically the one thing centrally that the Scottish Government has provided for this, apart from guidance and advice and legislation. We have a single portal. It's a result of a co-funded research partnership between the Scottish Government, the British Geological, myself, to ensure the Scottish SDI metadata and services are INSPIRE compliant, and DINA, a well-known repository of university and other data in Edinburgh, in Scotland, is hosting this GeoNetwork open source-based catalogue. When you're a data provider and you wish to use the metadata editor within the system, this is the interface you see, and this has been developed along as this open source software has improved. I see Sati sitting there. It is worthwhile pointing out that there are other open source options that support the GEMINI 2.1 standard, such as the Esri GeoPortal. So it's not the only one. But because it's integrated in this portal, we use all the different aspects of this portal, as you're about to see. That's why we continue to use this actual editor, which is provided not from Scotland, but from the UK location programme, i.e. from Westminster. We follow the standards, and the metadata is checked against schematron validation tool. Now that's important. You check the records in here, or if you're providing the data outside, you may take that schematron file and check the metadata outside. But when it comes into this portal, it is checked again for validity, and we get the results. Now, I don't want to talk too much about metadata. Here we have today, this is the actual view client, open layers, open source based. These pink polygons you'll just be able to see, they are a particular data set. They are the battlefields inventory boundaries. There you go. Historic Scotland is important to tourism, and a lot of people want to see this data. So this is an OGC and INSPIRE compliant web map service you can see there on top of an open source backdrop. There are currently 32 services and 108 dataset metadata records discoverable in this portal. Now that may not sound like very many, but we do have an important policy principle. We encourage only dataset metadata records of datasets that are portrayed or will be available from a service shortly. In other words, we don't bother organizations with hundreds and hundreds of metadata records of data that is never going to make it to a spatial data infrastructure. This saves them a lot of trouble and actually makes it useful. It does mean the numbers are smaller, but over time they will slowly grow. So all of those 108 data sets will eventually appear as a layer, a dataset layer in a service, and/or as a download service. This is a more colourful diagram, not from Cameron Easton, but from the UK government. And you may not be able to read that, but the key thing is that it also provides a central portal, data.gov.uk, which many of you will have seen. And our records, can you read the screen here? Our records are coming in harvestable from our standalone, and I should have mentioned CSW, OGC standard CSW compliant portal. And they are harvested down, when we require it, down to the UK government portal. The UK government uses that for reporting to EU on progress with INSPIRE, although we note, I remind you, it is a mixture of INSPIRE and non-SPIRE datasets and services. And those records will be used wider in the UK, in Europe, and also in Scottish applications. A new one coming along shortly, the Scotland's Environment Web, does use and will use many more of these services. The key thing is this CSW 202, sorry to talk about numbers, the fact that we're using in this distributed architecture, so we've got Scotland, we've got UK Westminster, and we've got the INSPIRE GeoPortal, which is coming up in a moment. At the moment we're down in England, if I may put it that way, and here our records have been harvested down, Scottish Government Corporate Datasets Web Mapping Service. You will know that the UK system of the UK location has been combined with the Linked Data initiative in the UK, which sometimes confuses issues, but it is there and it works. Once they're down there, they will be harvested from there to the INSPIRE GeoPortal, according to the member states' requirements. So I thought I would finish showing this distributed system today, actually showing the pilot INSPIRE GeoPortal. So here we have Scottish records, which have gone from Scotland down to London and across to the INSPIRE GeoPortal. These metadata records are, of course, discoverable now in 3 places. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the power of this system. So here is actually local nature reserves. And I put that up specifically because that's an example of a data set which could be provided by all the small administrations, the local authorities in Scotland, which would mean each of those, 32 as it happens, would have to provide their own metadata record and service. Sometimes that's going to be necessary, for example, for implementing INSPIRE legislation. Sometimes we can avoid that if it makes sense for these data sets to be collated centrally. So they are in fact collated by one single organisation, Scottish Natural Heritage. So there's one WMS which has all those data sets. There will be examples of that across all the annexes within INSPIRE. Second one, I mentioned Scottish Natural Heritage, sites of special scientific interest, wider scope. That's fine. I don't really need anything to add to that, but there's a lot of them, a lot more data, 1,600 of them, I think. We all love pink blobs, don't we? Guess what this is? The famous cadastral parcels. So here we have CP.cadastral parcel, and actually declared, not just in scope, but actually trying to be compliant with in content of the INSPIRE cadastral parcel theme from ROS, or Registers of Scotland. And there'll be similar such a diagram down in England, of course, from the English registry, an example of 2 data sets for which there is no one reference organisation for the whole of the member state. There'll be many examples of that. Now, this is one from my own organisation, the British Geological Survey. The name gives it away. Our data sets tend usually to cover the whole of the United Kingdom. But the interesting thing, I don't know if you can read that, this data set is designed for the 1 to 50,000 scale. As people get more interested and start to implement INSPIRE and the data sets get more usable and applied, I would say, the scale or resolution tends to get smaller. A small point, Yanis, I'm sure this isn't the right place to put this, but when I put this up, I realized I really need to report to the right person. I'm sure they're aware of this. But the reason you're not seeing any geology is there is because this data set is at a limited resolution, only appears. And the current pilot portal won't show such data sets. For me, as we progressed on a year from last year, and I'm sure the full production one will, for me, since we've all progressed on since last year, more and more data sets are being provided at really applied low resolutions, well, I would say high resolutions, okay? Really useful resolutions. And so that is important, and it's one of the things that's not a bit, what's the word, English word, naff, about the system, that any of us has to declare in the resource abstract of the metadata record. That is the only place where you can actually tell users, it's not a very usable part of the system, officially that's any place you can tell users, you will only see this data set if you zoom in that far. And this is one of the things that over time we need to improve. It is just an inherited thing. Sorry, I've gone on too far there. 2 more slides. Another data set, but this time is viewable at the scale of Great Britain, but of interest because we have the whole of the UK and we have seabed sediments. In other words, we're going into the marine environment. The environment does not reflect human administrative boundaries, and so more and more we will see useful data sets that cross administrative boundaries across the planet, in fact. Here's another example of a data set which is of very high scale, 1 to 50,000, very applied, and yes, we charge for it. In my experience, as more and more people and organizations have got involved, inspired by the INSPIRE process, they will, going through the process of creating metadata, thinking about creating actually accessible data web services over the web. A lot of organizations, for certain data sets they may charge for now, they will relax those charges. It just makes it easier and more open. And earlier you saw an example of a 50,000K data set from the British Geological Survey, which we used to charge for, but we don't anymore, as a result of this process. This one we probably will charge for, and so it's only an example near Glasgow, very detailed. Thank you. That will do for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I confirm the 5 minutes that Tim has. So, yeah, we are very well with time, so please, any questions to Tim? Yeah, Martin? Can I wait a second to have a microphone here so that everybody can hear you, please? Thank you.
You mentioned that...
Yeah.
Is it working? Yeah. That you have INSPIRE and non-INSPIRE data in your services. So when you provide those services to your national infrastructure and then to INSPIRE, how do you distinguish between the INSPIRE relevant data and the non-INSPIRE data sets?
We don't. It is deliberate. And the INSPIRE geoportal are, because we looked at it, many of us looked at it, how easy it was to do that. But what we're talking about here is an SDI across Europe, if you like. And some of those topics currently, some of those data sets will not currently formally exist under Annex themes. In the future, they may do. I believe that in a few years' time there could be 100 Annex themes if they are so defined. We thought about this, and because both the UK initiative, the UK Location Programme, and the Scottish Spatial Data Infrastructure do not wish to distinguish between the two, they wish it to be broader than just INSPIRE, neither of those make a distinction. In the INSPIRE geoportal, kindly, again, do not mind, as long as the records are compliant and all the technology and checking I talked about follow the INSPIRE regulations for metadata and follow the INSPIRE regulations for technology, and will declare with the INSPIRE GEMINI theme word if the content thinks that it is part of a specific INSPIRE theme. That's how you would be able to tell, but it isn't easy apart from that. So moving forward, if we can go on with not worrying about that too much, it just means that the data is going to be more discoverable and more available by not distinguishing between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have more questions to Tim? Well, I have 2 comments. One is the last one about answering about the 50,000 limitation we have. We know, we are aware of that. There is a bug because, as you saw, I mean, you've got Tim, the data coming from Scotland, they are viewed on top of another map, a background map. We have erroneously have a limitation there because this map goes to 250K as resolution. So that's why we have not decoupled this. So, but it's something that is done in the next few days. So you should be able to see also the 50,000. Concerning that, you made another comment that there is no other place in the metadata to indicate about the scale or viewable scale, but I suppose there is a resolution element in the metadata, spatial resolution, where this can be declared, and that would indicate that this metadata is at 50,000 viewable. So this data set, rather than having everything in the abstract, that's what I'm trying to say. It does not do any harm, but there is an element foreseen for that.
What I'm saying, and this is an interesting comment, what your plans are for the full production INSPIRE GeoPortal, a user, the most accessible thing to a user is reading the abstract. They tend to do that. They don't tend to be looking at that particular resolution element in the actual full metadata record.
Absolutely. No. However, the abstract is an abstract, so I mean, it should also be content-wise and length-wise appropriate and not be trying to pack everything in the abstract, so which then beats the purpose of easy readability and understanding immediately what the data set is about. Well, so we have to find a fine balance about that.
Absolutely. It is written somewhere that it is recommended that if the first thing you put in your abstract, if you have a resolution problem, is put it in the beginning of that abstract, right, so that people are likely to see it at the top line, if you like.
And I have a third comment, which again comes, I mean, I think it was what was important at the beginning of your presentation when you said the update of the GEMINI profile based on the experience, relaxing the requirements. I just confirmed that because it's exactly the same experience that we have from the INSPIRE GeoPortal side, that we access the metadata and discovery services from currently 18 member states. And exactly that experience the last couple of years has actually led us to follow exactly the same approach, relaxing the requirements, not from the INSPIRE point of view, it's the actual technical issue. It's not relaxing that some elements or INSPIRE will not be there and everything. It's the technical part of the encoding of the metadata. And we have to relax the requirements and what we expect in order to have more metadata coming in. So I confirm that this is actually, from experience, we learn lots of things, and we have learned a lot the last couple of years, yes, indeed.
That's what it's about.
Anybody thought about the question in the meantime? No. So we pass on. Thanks very much, Tim. Thank you.